All right. Well, welcome to the podcast.
Yes, the inaugural podcast
The very first of many.
for the movie Café.
Movie Cafe. Yeah. So I'm Jesse. I'm one of the hosts here.
I'm Ben. I am one of the other hosts here. One of two.
And
just the two.
Yeah, there's really only two of us. So unless you have a third unseen host that you're bringing onto the show, which I wish you would have let me know, Ben, because I was not prepared for this.
Just the cat peering down at me from above me here, but on top of my tall desk. But
You know, it's moments like that which make me wish I had like a bust of a Roman emperor just sitting on my desk. So it'd be like someone staring at me, or I could have a conversation with.
it's just me, you, and Brutus
Julius
over here.
Caesar.
Yeah.
I could put a hat on it and then pretend it's you. Just give it a little mustache.
I do have a little mustache, so it'd be perfect.
Draw a permanent smile on it. Put a T-shirt on it from a band that I've never heard of, which had something to do with the punk movement.
That'll be perfect.
Grunge.
It's yep.
All right, so our main business is we are a podcast. We talk about movies. We talk about little bits of, I guess, what we would call modern culture surrounding films. We like to talk about old movies that we're both fans of, or things we haven't seen in a really long time.
Yeah, it just kind of I mean, the podcast will vary, I'm sure, from episode to episode, but try to be covering things that maybe you haven't seen or you haven't seen in a long time, and you'd like to remember or discover, something you missed the first time around.
Yeah, and mostly to just have a pretty chill, enjoyable time, just talking.
Yeah, it's like hanging out with a couple of buddies that you've never seen in real life.
Yeah, and that you probably won't ever see in real life. But, the thought is there.
I guess just to briefly touch on our connection to films, though. Yeah, Jesse.
We watched them.
Yeah, we watched them. Is actually has gone to school to be an actor. So you got some understanding of the
couple times
the filmmaking process. And I just like them, and I like talking about them. And we kind of bonded over movies.
Yeah, like back in high school.
Yeah, like so we've been talking about this stuff for a long time. We're no experts by any means, but
and for some way or another, we haven't talked ourselves in circles too much. So today's movie that we were going to be chatting about was Scream, which is an old classic from the 90s in the horror genre. Kind of helped, as far as my understanding goes, kind of helped revitalize it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we just watched that the other day. I'd seen it before,
yes.
But years ago. It was actually because I grew up fairly not allowed to watch anything scary. So I never grew up with horror movies, and that was probably one of the first ones. The Thing was probably the real first one that got me into the genre.
Okay.
Great intro to the genre,
Yeah.
but Scream was sort of the more of that was my first intro into the slasher genre.
Yeah. I actually had a similar background with horror movies. We weren't specifically prevented from watching anything, past a certain age, but my parents just never had interest in them, and I was a very scared child, so I never had interest in them either. So, yeah, I didn't watch them until I was probably in my mid-20s.
Yeah, so it's like by the time we got to these at least I got to these horror movies that are like these grand staples, and they're not really anymore because I don't think kids nowadays actually. I'm 26. I'm talking about kids nowadays.
Kids nowadays, get off my lawn.
I feel like each generation now just lasts as long as the app they're all focused on does.
Oh Lord, that's a.
So it's like the Vine generation. Now they're gone.
No,
now we're on to
you're right.
We're on the Snapchat generation. We're the MSN Messenger / Facebook generation. We're not even the Twitter generation.
Nope. Oh dear.
So anyway, so now everyone's talking about like the Babadook and stuff like that, and I've never seen any of these or The Conjuring or anything like that. Like modern horror movies don't really interest me in the same way.
Okay.
But like I got into these films when I was already past being scared by them.
Mm-hmm.
So I was just looking at them for the creativity and the artistry. Like when I first watched Nightmare on Elm Street, I was just looking at the special effects, and they were dated and you could tell they were fake, but it was also just a cool moment where in the middle of talking he rips his face off.
Yeah, and actually speaking about dated special effects, I think if you truly enjoy films and the making of them and stuff, you will always look past that. Like, you got to recognize the effects were, potentially revolutionary for the time, and go like, that's really cool what they did with those limitations, and it looks darn good for that. Like, yeah.
Yeah, no one wants to use real fire anymore.
Yeah.
Like,
Miller.
in Nightmare on Elm Street, when he gets brought into the real world, she's looking around her place and the destruction as he's left her house, and his footsteps are on fire. And you don't see that kind of visual, tactile thing in horror movies these days.
And it really does feel different.
Gosh, it was almost refreshing to see Matthew Lillard in movies again.
I wasn't actually terribly familiar with Matthew Lillard, but thank you for introducing me to him, because...
Yeah,
man, he is a lot of fun.
He's like a staple of 90s, early 2000s films. Like not really quality ones per se. Like, I mean, he was in Wing Commander, which I enjoyed, but it's kind of a B-list Star Wars, really.
Okay.
It's based off a video game, so they don't have a good track record.
Right. Yeah, especially in the 90s.
But he was in that movie called... Oh yeah. He was in a movie called Hackers, and he was in the Scooby-Doo films. So like,
yeah.
He's great in those goofy, crazy roles, but they're never usually great films.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
I feel like he needs to pair with like a modern director where he can just do like a Nicolas Cage type of thing and go completely nuts on film for 40 minutes, of the running time, and just it'd be great.
Well, he was in Twin Peaks Return.
He probably was, and I just missed him because I am.
And you watched it.
Yeah.
I haven't even seen it, and I know
you
this.
kept pointing out like all these famous actors, these younger versions of them in Band of Brothers. I'm like, I don't see them. There's too much dirt on their faces and helmets on their heads. I don't see them.
I just see the gray brown filter, Jesse.
I'm invested in the story, okay?
Screw you. It's like, that's Jimmy Fallon. Who?
I did
that's
catch
probably
Fallon.
not a great example. Jimmy Fallon.
You said what's his name? Young Magneto.
Yeah, Fassbender.
Appeared multiple times. I didn't catch him once.
Neve Campbell hasn't been in a lot. She's like one of those actresses that didn't quite take off after the 90s, Like she was in that Wild Things movie with one of the Dylans. Matt Dillon, I think.
There's more than one Dylan? Who's the other Dylan?
The slightly dumber looking one. He was in Entourage.
Oh, that explains why I wouldn't know. Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. I mean, I'd heard the name Neve Campbell before, but she didn't look familiar to me, and I couldn't place her. So yeah.
So great 90s nostalgia for Scream, hey?
Yeah. Oh, just like watching like some of the cinematography and the music, which I found cheesy, but actually kind of worked in its favor, but was so 90s. Like,
yeah, like if there was something it was like a nice sunny day, she's walking out on the porch and something slightly suspicious happens, and Sydney's looking around, and then it's like dun, 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 like this really ominous over the top theme, but there's no visual cues to sort of match with it.
Yeah. It's like I think you said it's like the music was kind of telling us how to feel, and that happens in a lot of films. It's kind of the purpose of films or music in films.
But they've gotten much subtler with it.
Yeah, and they were much subtler prior to Scream. Like, this is like a standout example of like it's almost I think it's on purpose. Like that it's kind of it's jarring when you hear the music.
Like lampooning it or drawing attention to it for its own sake.
Maybe. Like, I think I when we finished watching it, I went and did a little. I read the Wikipedia page for Scream just to get a little more background on it. And you had mentioned the composer. I don't remember his name, but
was that Marco Beltrami?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, yeah.
And apparently this was his first big gig. And he said
it shows.
I didn't get this vibe, but apparently he had kind of more of the thoughts of like how music was made for westerns.
Oh, well, that totally makes
kind of sweeping
sense.
It was darker, more creepy because it was a horror movie, but he I don't think he went for subtle.
Yeah, well, that's the style of westerns in Star Wars too.
Yeah.
Everyone has a main rousing theme. Melodrama is the word. Indiana Jones is the same way.
Yeah.
Whenever there's a bad guy, it's like dun 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 dun. When the bald German shows up. Good evening, Fräulein.
The music is kind of leading you around. It's
Yeah,
Except that
but it's
those
bloody good fun.
those movies are much more. Not that this movie doesn't have action or thrills in it. It's a horror movie, but those movies typically tend to tie their music to like thrilling moments, where it's like the music in Scream will just swell when she's standing on the porch. Like that's
Okay, here's the thing
Yeah.
then. Good. So music that is slightly over the top and has presence of its own to make a film fun. That's something people don't really do. The music is always supposed to either get your heart racing or tell you sort of how to feel. Like, that's sort of what Marvel does with all its music now. It's sort of everything's watered down into it serves a very specific like psychological reason.
Yes.
But it misses the greater paint of being something in itself. Like, here's another great film from like I think the 90s, The Ghost and the Darkness.
Okay, yeah.
That's the one with where the two lions are attacking this group of construction workers trying to put this train through the middle of Africa. And it has got one of the most creative, interesting scores I've ever heard by Jerry Goldsmith. And it elevates the movie beyond, like, the direction isn't very good, I don't think. The story's good. It's well written. It's by William Goldman. And the acting's decent. It's Val Kilmer and Michael Douglas. But the direction is quite lacking. But the music just elevates the movie to a level beyond anything. Like, there's even such... I can't even quantify or say directly how the sound of... But there's an audio cue or a vocal cue that happens. It's sort of like... that happens, and it's sort of this African kind of chant that pops up periodically in the soundtrack. Anyone out there listening, go check out the soundtrack to The Ghost and the Darkness. Oh, better yet, just watch the movie The Ghost and the Darkness so you can tell what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And it really highlights how beautiful Africa is. Like, it highlights the wonder of the place.
I will have to rewatch that too, because I have seen that one. I don't. Again, it's been many years. That's going to be a running theme here. Is I saw that movie.
Yeah.
It's been many years though. Back to Scream, just not for a moment. To continue. I don't dislike the score, and I find it cheesy. I found the whole movie a little bit cheesy. Like I understand it kind of was a revolution for the horror film genre at the time, but I don't think it's just cheesy because of its age. I think it was probably cheesy at the time. They just didn't maybe know it because they were in the middle of the 90s.
The 90s themselves were just all cheesy.
Yeah, like I was seeing like The Thing or Halloween, like the original Halloween, like they don't feel as dated in a strange way, even if the effects are older. But that it adds to the charm of the film, like the music and the 90s references and all these things it felt very meta, not just like, obviously it was sort of supposed to be this meta commentary on horror films, but it's just having fun, I think, like with its...
It was a fun experience to watch that. It was a good time.
Yeah.
Oh, and I mentioned this to Ben. We were watching it. My favorite part of watching this film was when the main titles came on. It was the same font as "You would never steal a car. You would never buy illegal DVDs. But you would download a video. Downloading videos is stealing." That old piracy ad. It's the exact same font.
I feel like that font probably originated in the 90s, and it was used on like crime drama, like real life crime drama shows or something. Like, I don't know, that's the vibe I get from it. But
I bet it was one of those things that just produced at that time, and it was like, whoa, and then everyone used it.
It was like the original
and then
Papyrus or Comic Sans or something. Like, it was
exactly, it was the original Comic Sans, and then everyone remembers it from now on as that one thing. Now, the mystery element of it, we got into that a little bit, but who the killer was. How fooled were you going into that film? Like, because I'd seen it already, and I don't really remember figuring it out because I was just so into it. So how much could you tell what was going on beforehand?
Well, is it okay if I dip into some spoilers here?
Spoiler alert.
Yeah,
people.
okay. Early on, it actually kept the mystery going really well. There's a lot of avenues it could have gone, and a lot of characters who seem antagonistic towards our protagonist. Like the principal he wasn't really suspect, but he was waving the scissors around in one scene.
Right. Heck, and you even mentioned the deputy Dewey when he was inviting Courtney Cox, the weather girl, out into the woods, you're like, oh, this could be an avenue.
Yeah, because she's got an obvious look of like terror on her face when he's like, well, let's go check it out together. He's just trying to be romantic and a goofy thing, like, but she's like, this guy might be a murderer. Actually, I suspected her because she kind of had beef. Well, not really beef with the family, but she was. She seemed to always be chasing a story, right? I'm like, what if she just put on a mask and was making the
she
kills?
Just makes the stories.
Yeah. There's early on, more spoilery territory here. The girl's father, the main girl's father, goes missing, and they immediately suspect him. Like, and that's kind of kept up through most of the film, where they kind of suspect him. You're like, well, it could be him. Like, her boyfriend was never. It seemed like early on he was ruled out, so I kind of gave him a pass. But he got more suspect later on as his attitudes sort of changed.
Creepiness just kept going.
And there's the friend that works at the movie store because he's just like a movie obsessed nerd.
If I have a daughter who ever dates a guy that creepy looking or just that moody, like his resting face was, I'm gonna stalk.
Yeah.
You.
Yes.
That's shotgun material right there. That's bring out the shotgun and keep him off your porch kind of boyfriend.
That's it.
Never
across
trust
country.
a boyfriend with greasy hair and a white tee.
But that was the look in the 90s. There was no other boys.
Ever since Marlon Brando, anyone wearing a white T-shirt just for kicks, you know something.
Yeah. So yeah, there was a lot of characters that were none of them were particularly great candidates for the murder, but none of them were really disqualified either. And I would say the tension for most of them, or at least half of my suspects, was up there up until the final confrontation. Not really spoilers here. The killer gets unmasked, and they have a final confrontation. So you do get to see who done it.
Yeah, and then when the two teenagers who came running up to Sid, like the movie kid and Matthew Lillard were yelling at each other, did you have like an inkling of who it was at that point?
We better delve into spoilers here for a moment.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. Well, we already gave them warning. So you have been warned.
Yeah,
you have been weighed, measured. Now take your punishment.
Okay. Yeah, at that point, I was pretty sure that there was multiple killers. I wasn't sure how many, because, and I think this was intentional. The boyfriend is one of the killers. The girl's boyfriend. His death didn't look super convincing. It looked overacted. And I think that's on purpose, because he actually turned out to be alive. He was one of the killers. And he was just trying to, manipulate the girl into... I don't fully know what the plan was by pretending he was dead, actually, but...
Just messing with
guess,
her,
yeah,
I think,
they were
honestly.
just a couple of sadistic pricks.
Yeah, who were just really wanting revenge on her and hurting and torturing this girl. I mean, like, that's also post-sex. Like, they just had sex in this room.
Right, yeah.
And that's when they, like... Also, him and Matthew Lillard set it up so that would happen, right?
And I know that he's kind of given a bit of a motivation, but they also say explicitly when they're talking later on, like, it's scarier when the killer has no motive, or you're right, they just wanted to mess with her, like, oh yeah, we just made love and it's all sweet and we're teenagers and then I died, but now I'm back, because he's a psychopath. Like, yeah, it's... Why
didn't we know more psychopaths during high school? I feel like from any, most American TV shows, usually we are short one stoner and one psychopath.
Isn't film supposed to reflect life?
like what is this? I feel gypped. Like we had minor psychos in high school. People who were mildly destructive to themselves and to others.
We grew up in a Hallmark film and you know it. But back to the Scream spoilers here for a second. Yeah, I kind of figured out there was more than one killer. And the boyfriend's death looked overacted, and this was a weird thing, but at some point during the action in the final scenes, the girl locked herself in a car, and the guy in the ghost mask, the Scream killer, comes up to the car and he's like banging on the window trying to get in to kill her. And the way the mask is built, like it's a real Halloween costume from a cheap Halloween store. There's a big gaping hole for the mouth, so you can with a little bit of foam over it, so a person can still breathe through it. And because of the way the light was shining in the scene, I could see a bit of the form of the mouth in the mask. I'm like, that looks like Matthew Lillard. No word of a lie. I was like, oh wow, I can see right through that mask. And so
Like I did not notice that at all.
I still thought there was 3 killers though. I thought movie guy was for sure in on it, but he actually was not. The guy who worked at the movie store. It turns out he was he was the virgin of the film. He was the final girl.
That was a great line. I'm just so glad I'm a virgin for once.
But yeah, I thought that was an interesting setup to have multiple killers, and they maybe I still don't watch a lot of horror films, but I just kind of know the landscape of movies now. Maybe I'm preconditioned to think like a little bit outside the box in that way. I'm not saying I'm smart or anything, but just
that's a problem though. We all know the tropes
Yeah.
now, but the tropes used to be twists that were just
I'm sure
great.
in the '90s that was kind of, I don't know if it was revolutionary, but it was wild.
Like
right?
there was, I don't think there was a horror movie that I can recall that was mainstream which had multiple killers pretending to be the same
Yeah,
person.
exactly. Yeah, that would have blown people away. So,
Yeah, it's like the twist of, spoiler alert, Jason Voorhees in the first Friday the 13th is his mom. I mean, I'm over halfway through the movie and I don't understand how you even think it's Jason Voorhees at this point. It's just someone random who's killing people. I'm thoroughly not enjoying the film. I think it's awful.
Oh,
but
okay.
I liked Halloween.
Yeah.
But anyway, we'll get back to that.
We'll talk about Halloween at some point.
later.
I've seen Halloween as well, and I didn't love it.
Yeah, maybe we need to rewatch it because I think there's some really good filmmaking.
Yeah, I just feel like it was strangely sloppy. I don't know, or something, but which is odd because it's a classic.
But that's another thing. There was not a wasted shot in Scream.
Yes,
I don't
we had
think.
talked about that. I think,
Yeah.
even if
Everything was incredibly
even
deliberate.
if something seemed inconsequential, and technically in the context of the story it was furthering a character motivation or understanding of a character or building tension or something, right? Like there was no wasted shot.
And I love what they use. I don't know if this is the right term. The use of inserts, or where basically it would be a close-up shot of a highlighting detail, like when Sydney's in the bathroom, and the music is building, and you see the empty stalls, and you hear someone whispering her name, and then you go to a close-up of the feet dropping down the stall. And then slowly, it cuts back to her, and then cuts back to the feet, and then slowly the killer's outfit goes down over top of it. Those kind of shots, I don't think they're nearly as possible anymore, or as used anyway, of that kind of a close-up.
And that might help
which highlights such a good
date
detail.
the film in the '90s too, but not in a bad way. Like you're right, you don't see that shot used a lot nowadays. But
yeah, well, it's like John Wick. I guess, obviously we all know how John Wick has changed action movies, but a lot of that stuff is stuff that you would go back to, say, the 80s or the 90s for that kind of visual language. So it's like not everything is a bold new invention, or it just might be a recall. A recall to an earlier era or an earlier fashion in filmmaking.
yeah, sometimes things are just revolutionary because they haven't been done for a while. But no, Scream was incredibly well paced, I guess, in that regard. Like, kudos to the editor and probably the director as well for that.
Yeah,
like, tight film. It's nearly 2 hours long, and it doesn't feel like it to me.
Was it that long?
I feel like it was an hour 50 minutes or something like that.
Yeah, it didn't feel long. What else has Wes Craven done? Like, I don't really know the guy much other than he did the Nightmare on Elm Street movies.
Yeah, I don't really know him either. Like, I know the name. You're always like, oh, it's Wes Craven, but I don't really know what it means. So
yeah, he's one of those names that you throw around, like Wes Craven, John Carpenter, and George A. Romero.
Yeah.
In that genre of creating some of the iconic films.
But I couldn't tell you what else he had done.
Yeah, so it was a fun movie. A little bit of surprise there, except for Matthew Lillard's mouth, which, pretty honest, it's a big mouth. So
I
there you
admit
go.
it wasn't too far from the end of the film, so it didn't spoil it a lot. But I mean, up until that moment, I was still guessing. I kind of figured the boyfriend was in on it, but I didn't know. I mean, the death could have been real. Like, that's the thing, is the film, there was so many avenues it could have gone with who the killers were going to be, that, it actually does keep you guessing.
Well, then, that's Scream.
Yeah. It's good. You should watch it, whether you heard the spoilers or not, and you've seen it, or haven't seen it, and spoiled yourself, it's still good. Like, it's...
Have some fun with it.
That's the thing, is even though I didn't know the secret going in, it's just so much fun the way it's pace, and the music is kind of goofy, and the dialogue is snappy, and like it's a fun movie more than it's a scary movie almost.
And I've never seen a movie monster get hit in the balls that much in a non purely parodying
Such an
way.
incompetent killer. That's great.
It was so great though. Like it's just some idiot with a costume, and the girl throws a can of a bottle of beer, and it just smashes in his face, and you can tell it hurts, which is so great. All right, well, thanks for joining us today, guys. It was a lot of fun just sitting here and chatting. We'll be coming out with another one of these in the not too distant future.
Yeah, we hope you'll stick around, come back for another one. This is probably more or less going to be the format. I'm sure as we go along, we'll get this a little bit tighter.
Yeah, we might interview some people.
Yeah,
we might,
but it'll always be kind of conversational. I expect there's going to be a lot of tangents and jokes and stuff, and it just,
if you can follow along with like the inside jokes, then you might be a kindred soul, because we make a lot of references here.
And we hope that you enjoy that kind of thing. So,
yeah. Well, thanks for listening with us. You guys have yourselves a good. Oh, what was that line from Truman Show? In case I don't see you, good morning. And in case I don't see you, good afternoon, good evening, and good night.